So a little bit about HKS. We are a global firm. We have 24 offices worldwide, but we are headquartered here in Dallas. So of our 1,400 staff, 600 are located here in Dallas. We span commercial architecture through most market sectors. We have a lot of very visible projects here in Dallas-Fort Worth, including AT&T Stadium, where the Cowboys play, and the new Ranger Stadium Globe Life Field. We do work with universities, healthcare systems, the W Hotel in Uptown, and then some of the new commercial developments around Clyde Warren Park, the Union, and Park Place are the other examples of the type of work that we do. We are more than just architects. I am an architect by trade, but my specialty resides in sustainable design, but we're also engineers, we're interior designers, we're researchers, we're anthropologists. So we really do take a multidisciplinary approach to the built environment. So I'm not going to read all of these statistics, but I want to maybe just point out one. This is sort of metrics on HKS specifically. The one that I want to point out is that we have $30.5 billion in construction work ongoing right now. So that's a tremendous impact. We're one of the largest firms in the world. And that translates to a significant impact on the built environment. This is obviously not just specific to HKS, but globally, the building industry is responsible for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Of that, 28% is building operations, so it's heating and cooling and the fossil fuels that the building actually consumes once it's built. And then another 11% is embodied energy, which is kind of a fancy way of saying the energy that is emitted as materials are manufactured, they're transported to the site. That's largely in structural materials such as concrete and steel, but we're recognizing as we're trying to keep our global temperatures down, and we've got a fairly finite timeline in order to do that, that the embodied emissions that are coming from materials play a significant impact. We also recognize that the global building stock will be doubling by 2060, so this impact is not foreseen to go down by any means. Maybe I should back up and say that I'd like to talk about our impact in 3 different categories. The one that I just talked about was our sort of environmental impact. I do want to also talk about the human health impact and then also the social equity side of impact and opportunity. From a human health perspective, I want to set the stage by citing some numbers. The EPA has currently 83,000 chemicals in its inventory. Of that, 200 have been tested, and of that, 5 have been restricted. So there's a tremendous amount that we don't know about the chemicals that are going into our bodies as a consequence of things like finishes and materials that go into buildings. So this is sort of just scratching the surface, but you can start to see all of the chemical composition that can go into the built environment. So it's not just the shampoo that you're using, the lotion that you're putting on, ladies, the makeup that you're putting on your body, but it's also the products that we're surrounding ourselves with. We had a guest speaker that was an MD doctor, Dr. Claudia Miller, a couple of years ago that came and talked to us, and she said something that was pretty astounding. She said, architects have a greater responsibility to public health than doctors do. And when you start to look at all of the finishes and all of the materials that go into our built environment, you can start to see why we spend 90% of our time indoors. So we're completely and totally affected by the indoor environment that we've created. Some different ways that toxins can start to appear in our bodies is inhalation, that new car smell, those VOCs that we all like so much. Babies, like, you sort of think about the dangers of babies being close to dust on the floor, but really the exposure to toxins in the built environment affect humans too through dermal abrasion and inhalation. And what's important to really understand is that a lot of these chemicals are persistent and they're bioaccumulative. And what that means is that they build up in our systems and our bodies are unable to flush them out. This is a research study that was done in 2005 that tests the blood of umbilical cord babies that have just been born, their umbilical cord blood. And these babies have not been exposed to any sort of environmental contaminants, but they tested positive for over 300 chemicals. And so those chemicals were passed down from mother to baby in utero. And it's also important to recognize that it's not just the effects that materials have on us when they're installed in the buildings. It's important to look upstream and downstream too. This is a community in Houston. These communities are called fence line communities. They're typically minority, typically socioeconomically disadvantaged, but they are right next to manufacturing plants. This particular plant, I think, was manufacturing Scotchgard, perhaps. But these communities have a disproportionate amount of cancer rates. They have lower life expectancies than the national average, and it's because they're exposed to chemicals and products on the manufacturing side. And the same thing happens with disposal. When you start to look at what happens when you rip building materials out and put them into landfills, then you start to see a similar level of contamination. And so the third impact that I wanted to talk about is really more of an opportunity, depending on how you look at it. But this statistic says that 90% of the world's population does not have access to design services. We as an industry only serve the top 10% of people that can afford access to our services. Whoops, let's see. But when you start to look at some of the most systemic problems globally, you start to understand that there's a design component to that. 2 billion people worldwide are in need of safe housing. 120 million children globally lack access to schools. 800 women a day die due to complications from lack of access to medical services. And it's not just developing countries. Right here in the United States, there are significant social inequities that the built environment and design thinking can start to address. So all of that was kind of a bummer, but what has been really heartening to see is frameworks such as this is the UN Global Compact. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You're starting to see frameworks like this that recognize that social issues and environmental issues have everything to do with each other, and if we're really going to tackle sustainability holistically, then we need to look at both. We're starting to see a lot of publicly traded corporations signing on to the UN Global Compact. They've got ESG reporting that they have to do for financial reasons. We're privately held company and aren't beholden to that, but we have decided that in 2020 we'll be signing on to the UN Global Compact and trying to really wrap our heads around which of the SDGs are most applicable to us in terms of how we operate our business and how we design our buildings. So we've gone through a series of principled prioritization, and I won't get into all of this, but really what this is it's a recognition that there are some of these SDGs that really we have the ability as designers to affect more than others, so we've started to outline what those are, and from an operational side and from a project side, what we can start to do to impact them. So going back to my 3 buckets, what are we doing about our environmental impact? This is all about sort of data and understanding what it is that we're trying to do so that we can go through a process of continuous improvement. And I promise I will not take you through all of these charts and numbers. But the point of this is that we are signatories, as are many architecture firms, of the AIA 2030 Challenge. And that is an industry-wide challenge where we are committed to designing net zero buildings by the year 2030. There's a gradual progression of that right now. The benchmark is a 70% reduction in energy use intensity. You can see that our big fat number of 41.8 is not there yet. We have an internal goal of 55% energy reduction across our portfolio. But what's interesting about this is the data is powerful. We can slice and dice who's reporting, who's not, what market sectors are low, what market sectors are high, what regions of the country are low, what regions of the country are high. So we can really start to understand how the buildings that we design are tracking against this industry-wide target and what we need to do in order to affect those numbers. So what are we doing about our human health impact? As you're familiar with nutrition labels for food, we as an industry were recognizing that we didn't have this level of transparency, this level of ability to understand what it is that was in our building products. So we asked our manufacturing partners to start to disclose this information. what has come out of that is a dizzying array of certifications and standards. Some of them are product specific, some of them address human health issues, some address environmental issues. It can get very confusing very quickly, but the name of the game is that it's a nutrition label to help us understand what the impacts of these materials are. A, to just make more informed choices because it's more transparent, and then B, to start to select chemicals and materials that have more benign options. But recognizing that the certifications are really, it's a tall task to expect designers to understand all of them and to be able to make informed choices. So we created what started out as a sticker on a binder that we have in an architecture firm. You'll see lots of binders with lots of different materials, and so the idea was that we would put a mindful materials label on it. You can pull out that binder and look at carpet and understand which of these carpets had declare labels or EPDs or HPDs. So it was a very easy way to start to put an easy button on understanding how to really dive into the materials issues. The sticker has since morphed into an open source cloud-based platform that is no longer run by us, but is accessible to anybody, so manufacturers can go and upload all of their information on all of their products, and designers can go and they can start to use that database to make more informed decisions. And finally, what are we doing about our community impact? And this one is a personal favorite for me. In 2014, I founded an initiative called Citizen HKS, and it's our public interest design initiative where we commit to donating 1% of our billable hours to largely nonprofits that could otherwise not afford access to design services, so that 90%. So that's the create piece that you see. The connect piece is our month of service, which is recognizing that it's really important for our employees to get out and volunteer in communities and start to address issues that are local and specific to them. And then the contribute piece is our annual fundraiser, which we internally raise money to go towards the building of projects that we design. So just a couple of project examples. This first one, and maybe I should also point out that you can see which SDG, which Sustainable Development Goal of the UN Global Compact we feel like these start to touch. This first project is a maternity unit in rural eastern Uganda. Was completed in 2017, and we were pretty careful and smart about collecting some before and after metrics, so we really could understand what the impact is. From a sustainability perspective, I loved this project because we had to design a net zero building, a net zero water building, and not because it was LEED certified or the reasons was because there was no electricity and there was no running water to the site. But it taught us that we really should start to approach more projects making that kind of assumption from the beginning, because so often we just hand a building over to the engineer and say, make it energy efficient. But the architecture has a big role to play, and so when you start to look at how you have to design to maximize daylight, how you have to design to capture prevailing breezes, because if you don't, it's not a usable and functional space. It takes a whole different sort of perspective on what it means to design with sustainability in mind. And then from a human and community impact, we've had a great increase. This is a regional resource center, so we've had a 30% increase in number of deliveries at the facility, just simply because there's more space there. There have been 0 reported maternal or infant deaths. Rural eastern Uganda has a very high infant mortality rate, even higher than the average of Uganda, and certainly higher than the global average. So being able to start to affect some of those big problems with one sort of building was really a great thing to see. Another project a little bit closer to home, this is Lane Tech's Sensory Wellbeing Hub. This is a space within a classroom that's designed to serve children who are on the autism spectrum. Sometimes they need sensory stimulation, sometimes they need sensory deprivation, but the idea is that this is a piece of a classroom where they can go and sort of get their needs met so that they can filter back into a normal classroom. And then right here in Dallas, the 24-Hour Club, some of you might know, it's down on Ross Avenue, drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility. This one opened last year. So return on investment, this is the part that I think maybe makes me the most proud, because it was all sort of theoretical when we pitched the idea of donating our services and what would we get out of it. This is a picture of our website. This is the healthcare page, so if you want to go look up hospitals that HKS has designed, this is where you'll land, and you can see that the maternity ward in Uganda is front and center, and it's been featured as part of our regular portfolio. You see the same thing on our education landing page. You see the sensory well-being hub there. So it's really starting to help us differentiate ourselves in the market, even with our more traditional work. And this I'm going to scroll through quickly. These are just a few of the marketing media placements that Citizen HKS projects have gotten. And you know, these projects they're small. They're a drop in the bucket compared to the scale of projects that we normally do. But I'm happy to say that out of the hits that the HKS website gets in the top 10, 3 of the top 10 are Citizen HKS projects. And then finally, I think, Brenda, you had mentioned that millennials are very purpose-driven, and so one of the other advantages to a program like this is that it starts to draw top talent. It affects employee engagement, employee satisfaction, employee recruitment. These are a few, what is the word I'm looking for? On Glassdoor, reviews on Glassdoor that talk about the pros for working for HKS, and you can see that the Citizen HKS initiatives are front and center. And so while it's really hard to articulate how these projects affect our bottom line, I think that if you asked any of our executives, they would absolutely say that this makes a difference in the quality of people that we get and the quality of work that we get.